Now, French authorities have arrested a man suspected of ploughing a car into a group of soldiers in the north of Paris this morning. 6 were injured, 2 seriously, as a result of the incident. The suspect, who was driving a black BMW, was detained on a motorway after being chased by police. With more details, here's Charlotte Dubensky.
It's been confirmed that the man arrested on a northern highway in France between Boulogne and Calais is the suspect that police have been searching for. He was arrested by elite forces, and we understand that he was shot 5 times during that arrest, and a police officer was also injured as they tried to apprehend the man. He was the person who they believe was behind the attacks, which took place just a few hundred metres behind me at the opening of a soldiers' barracks at around 8:15 local time in Paris this morning. The local mayor has described this as a deliberate act and said this is what he saw take place.
There were a dozen officers at the entrance at 7:57 in the morning when a car which was parked at the end of the road rammed into them at speed while they were approaching their vehicle. They did not choose the location by chance. There are many police officers and cameras are everywhere. On the video, we can see the attacker and how the attack took place. The place is symbolic, just as the Eiffel Tower or Paris airports or Notre Dame. They came to this town where anti-terrorist forces are doing their remarkable job.
The Paris Prosecution Office has opened an investigation into this case, and they are pursuing charges of attempted murder of security forces in connection with a terrorist enterprise. Now, one of the reasons why it's been suggested that this place may have been strategically chosen is because it's where the main intelligence agency, and it's also a staging point for soldiers who are assigned to protect prominent sites here in Paris. Now, Paris is no stranger to attacks. It's been under a state of emergency. In fact, the whole of France has been under a state of emergency since November 2015, when there were those coordinated attacks here in the city. And since then, France has seen a number of large-scale terror attacks. Now, President Macron has said that one of his aims in his first year of the presidency is to remove that state of emergency by November of this year. Whether that's plausible or not remains to be seen.
Well, as Charlotte was saying there, French security forces have been the target of a number of terror attacks this year. And we can discuss this further now with Chris Hunter. He's a former UK Army intelligence officer, and he's with us this afternoon. Good afternoon to you, Chris.
Good afternoon.
Good news that this main suspect has been arrested, but do you think it was a surprise he wasn't challenged before this attack, given that it appears he was lying in wait for a few hours before he hit the target?
I am surprised, actually, yes. Obviously, trying to find a terrorist in a place like France, or indeed anywhere in Europe at the moment, I've heard the analogy, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack full of needles. It is difficult to find them, but there are certain basic day one, week one procedures that security forces should implement, and protective security, such as looking out for hostile reconnaissance. People actually that are reconnaissing these sites, such as security force bases and military bases, they should be looking for patterns. They should be looking out for people who are carrying out recces and indeed waiting there, to carry out attacks. So it is a little bit surprising, but it's just, we're all thankful that, there weren't any fatalities.
Sure, and the fact that he seemed to drive away so easily too, it was a number of hours before he was caught. Is that something that security forces will be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the other features about this particular attack is that it took place during a shift changeover at around 8 o'clock Paris time. And that's one of the other things that terrorists look for when they're carrying out hostile reconnaissance. They're looking for patterns, they're looking for vulnerabilities, they're looking for cameras, security forces, the weapons and equipment carried by the security forces, i.e. their own vulnerabilities, if you like. But certainly something like a shift changeover where people aren't potentially as alert as they might be, or where briefings are taking place, that's something that's been carried out by criminals and terrorists across the world in the past. So again, it shows that perhaps there's been a little bit of complacency taking place, but they certainly should have, some form of counter surveillance, certainly some form of backwatch, and certainly some form of heightened security during those shift changeover patterns. Those are lessons that certainly the British learned in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and that was day one, week one stuff for us.
Sure, and in terms of a wider response from the authorities, is there any more they can do, given the sort of heightened state of alert the country's been in since 2015 anyway?
I think it's very, very difficult, to do any more for these type of attacks. We've seen repeated calls for vehicle jihad, as they call it, from both ISIS and Al-Qaeda, on online forums, on online magazines and publications, videos. Just last week we saw calls for this type of attack. It's very, very difficult to prevent either the lone radicals from being radicalised, from individuals from being radicalised in universities and mosques, and of course those people that are being trained, recruited and returning from Daesh and Al-Qaeda territories. But there are certain things that can be done. Certainly looking at not setting patterns by the security forces, that's one. Looking at putting in protective security measures, counter surveillance, during those sort of vulnerable periods or vulnerable locations, that's another. And certainly education and training of the general public, I think, is something that's woefully inadequate across Europe. And I think a lot more can be done to make the public aware of terrorist tactics, techniques and procedures, because I think people do want to know how they should act, what to identify and how to report it.